Well, thank you all for coming to our session on From Mobile Apps to Big Data, Technology to Promote the Rule of Law. So my name is Jeff Aresty. I'm the moderator here today. I get to introduce the session itself, the speakers, and then we'll do some back and forth after they each make some presentations amongst each other. And then it's interactive. So please think up your questions, and we look forward to answering the questions. So again, the title is From Mobile Apps to Big Data, Technology to Promote the Rule of Law. And these are terms that are being used pretty routinely these days. As the founding president of the Internet Bar Organization, we've done quite a bit of research into these areas. And I sort of like to think of explaining mobile apps, which obviously most people think of the services like Lyft and Uber and Airbnb and so forth, or buying online. But very few people are thinking in terms of chatbots and other ways in which law is going to be made accessible to people through your phone. And yet, if you go to some of the innovative justice technology meetings, you're going to be seeing examples of people talking to their phone, saying such things as, I just got thrown out of my apartment, what do I do? And from that point forward, the technology exists to connect that person to whatever resources they need to begin to get their problem resolved. And of course, a lot of lawyers over the course of the past many years are trying to do such. The earliest version of that was going to a store where you could buy a book and a checklist and some attachment that would let you print out documents. And people who, in some states, are calling that the unauthorized practice of law. And chatbots are just another version of the same thing. In the end, the books are there, the disks are there, and the chatbots will be there. So if we think of that type of mobile application as the way to reach the individual user, that's what this is all about. We're going to be empowering people at the individual user level because the mobile apps are in their hands, and that's the most ubiquitous technology that exists. The big data is something else altogether. The big data helps you and helps groups at certain levels understand the pain points for justice. You know, where are the problems that exist in the justice sector? How do you find them? And of course, if you're looking at the courtrooms, you're looking at the backlogs of cases that aren't being pushed through, and so you try to figure out ways with that big data to solve a problem. But if you think about a problem a slightly different way, as it was presented to me this way by a legal aid executive director who said, you know, I just got 60 bankruptcies in the office. And when we started digging down into the bankruptcies, it turned out that 9 to 10 months earlier, there was a report that came out, big data type of report, that the city itself had made available, showing that there were about 20 repossessions of cars in a certain zip code. And those 20 people, almost all of them, were in the office filing a bankruptcy. And what the executive director said is that, I know that car. I know exactly where to have gone. If I had known that there were 20 repossessions, there's a car shop that I could have gone to, an automobile dealership that I could have, you know, stopped those repossessions. Because what happened was those people lost their cars, and then they had lost the ability to go to work. And then after they lost the ability to go to work, they got tossed out. They couldn't pay their rent, and eventually they got to the point where all they could do was file a bankruptcy. Well, if legal aid had caught that 9 months earlier, big data would have helped stop that pain point from developing. So there's a lot of mobile apps on the individual level and big data that can help us address rule of law in a positive way. And so we've assembled a panel here. The World Justice Forum has done a great job of bringing some wonderful people here. So let me introduce our speakers to you. And now, as I said, they'll each speak briefly. We will start with a video after I make these introductions with Ms. Marietje Schaake. She is a member of the European Parliament, and she is from the Netherlands, a member of the Democratic 66, part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for the Europe Party. The Wall Street Journal called her Europe's most wired politician, while CNN called her a rising Dutch star who makes an increasingly rare, passionate and public case for liberalism and globalization. And she'll be speaking first. We then have Carter Draper to my immediate right, and Carter serves as the program director at iLab Liberia, which is a tech hub based in Monrovia that provides Liberians with the tools, training, and supportive community to affect change in their professional lives and to encourage changes to actually make their way to the general society as a whole. And his interests and passions are in open government, access to information, and mobile for international development. He previously served in the legislature there. Our speaker to his right is Amir Sokolowski, and he's the Chief Partnership Officer and Senior Legal Analyst for a group called Legal Atlas. And I remember showing up at a program at the Hague Institute for Internationalisation of Law, where we, along with Legal Atlas, were there being given recognition for some work that we were doing. And Legal Atlas is just a fascinating tool that's used to demonstrate how laws governing a particular subject matter area can differ around the world with a very interesting and exciting tool. And Amir is focused on defining the topics and their users and finding the experts so that the information that appears in the Legal Atlas can be trusted and utilized by many around the world. A speaker to his right is Wilfried de Wever, and he is here from the Hague Institute for Internationalisation of Law, and he's the head of their Justice Accelerator. Over the course of the work we've done in innovating justice, HEAL is the group everybody points to as the leading group. Not only do they push the research forward when it comes to what is innovative justice, they then help and catalyze companies to get their project underway. They create a lot of wonderful opportunities. Really, Wilfried's role is he scouts and looks for all the justice innovations. And there's all kinds of billions of dollars being spent in investing in legal technology and justice incubators today. And that is his role. And our final speaker, who just came in late yesterday, Abdulla Al-Majid, is the Undersecretary of Support in the IT, Finance, Human Resources area for the United Arab Emirates as the Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Justice, and he is their Chief Innovation Officer. In his work, he has to work within the frame of what is the government strategy for innovation, very forward-thinking approach in the UAE as they have a strategy, and he is in charge of implementing it and making sure that the innovations to justice that he develops are in alignment with the strategy. So without further ado, our first speaker, Carter.
I'm very grateful to the World Justice Project for the opportunity of getting me here, and I look forward to learning from each of you over the course of this forum. Growing up during the Liberian elections, growing up during the Liberian 14 years of civil crisis, a period when our institutions were disrupted and the rule of law non-existent. Then I understand what it means for your civil liberty to be threatened. Because of these injustices that many of my family, friends, and fellow Liberians experience, I've dedicated my professional life to be able to promote the rule of law by democratizing and decentralizing access to technology in Liberia. My organization, iLab Liberia, we have the mission to provide Liberians with the needed tools, trainings, and a supportive community to effect a change in the professional lives of Liberians and to encourage them to transmit those changes to their various communities. Many of the projects we've worked on are to support access to information by using open source platforms, encourage citizen participation and engagements. And we do all of this to be able to promote and sustain a democracy. And from the country I'm from, the democracy is highly fragile and corruption is at its peak. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you on a couple of the projects we worked on, and they are categorized into two sections. One is open governance and citizen participation and support to electoral processes. The second aspect has to do with data collection, visualization, analysis of citizens' report of instability and injustices within their communities. On governance and citizen engagement, we've developed a freedom of information request platform that allows citizens to be able to use their smartphones and computers to request information directly from the public bodies. And what that tool is helping to do is building a central repository, because as requesters request information and the public bodies are providing response to the information, a couple of that data remains on the platform and a couple of it goes to the requester. And over time, citizens will be able to have one central point where they can be able to have access to government data. Additionally, it promotes the aspect of compliance and monitoring. There are a couple of civil society organizations that are monitoring the implementation of FOR. And prior to this platform, they didn't have a tool to be able to measure as to whether a request was actually sent out. So it's mostly also kind of a tool that the Information Commission is now fully using, so that as they receive complaints of lack of compliance on request, they can be able to look onto the platform and verify that yes, a request was actually sent this time and it took this length of time and it has not been answered to. Another project under the governance is an anti-corruption reporting platform that we've developed along with the Sierra Leone Anti-Corruption Commission. And that platform allows citizens to be able to report issues specifically on service delivery. Both Sierra Leone and Liberia share a common challenge wherein the government has free access to education, free medical treatment for pregnant women and all of that. But most times when parents take their kids to the school, the principal or whoever in authority will demand some other fees before they enroll the student into the school, which should have actually been free. On the health side, a lot of the institutions take the drugs that are intended for maternity women, place those drugs in their individual drug stores. And so when one goes to the hospital, though it should be a free service and you should have free drug, they will now write a prescription and kind of direct you to a particular hospital to go to be able to acquire the treatment. He also works with the police. He also worked with the power supply company and all of that. And so the government thought that, okay, if we can have a platform that will allow citizens to report issues of what it refers to as petty corruption, that will allow us to be able to conduct some sort of put internal mechanism into place to improve service delivery. And so that platform is currently used for that purpose. Back home in Liberia, we also developed a platform in collaboration with the Professional Standard Division of the Liberia National Police. That platform is kind of offline tool that allows citizens to use a hotline or basic SMS to report issues of police misconduct, as well as police professional behavior as well. And the Professional Standard Division of the National Police is now using that tool to be able to create programs that will allow citizens and community to engage even more. That is improving the way the police work along with the citizen or engage the citizen and allowed, kind of create awareness with the citizen to understand what the police is entitled to do and what they are not allowed to do, and that creating a kind of, trust within the police sector. Looking at data collection, visualization, we've done a couple of projects around that. At the moment, we are supporting over 16 different civil society organizations under the Peace Building Office, forming a network called the Early Warning, Early Response Network. And what that network is doing, they are bureau reporters out in the villages, out in the towns, like the town chief, or community school teacher, people on the farms and all of that. And we develop a system that allows them to kind of just send basic SMS of whatsoever happening in their communities. And so we're collecting data on land dispute, on tribal tension, on religious issues, on rape issues, on different sort of violence coming into the system. And at the end of every month, we create a severity ranking matrix report out of that, and we share that report with stakeholders, like the national police, like the United Nations missions in Liberia, then they were operating the security sector, and other different stakeholders as responders, who then go into the community and then be able to kind of put some of those conditions under control or issues under control before they even kind of spread out. During the Ebola virus disease, being a tech hub home, we were one of the first tech respondents. What we were able to do was we worked with the call center. The call center was receiving calls from around the entire country of suspected Ebola cases. And so we collected those data, we digitized those data, and then we visualized the data on a map. So when WHO, CDC, when they first entered the country, we were one of those first, on-the-ground responders that they met with to understand what was going on, because then the central government, the Ministry of Health, didn't have any system to collect information. So just what the few information we were collecting from the call center is that information that we were using. But the map was able to help in two ways. One, it helped the responders, like WHO, like the Chinese government, like the German government, and all of those different actors to be able to know where help was needed the most around the country and which type of help was needed in those places. And so they were able to tailor their support and their response based on the type of data they have at hand at the time. We also supported the Medical Teams International to develop a mobile app, mobile data collection system that allows them to go throughout the entire country, identifying both active and inactive health facilities and getting statistics as to whether the number of personnel they have, whether they have drugs and all of those things. And through that, they were able to kind of support and strengthen some of those health facilities. We also worked on the project around visualization and analysis called the... So that project is mostly about supporting and collecting data on child labor on rubber plantations. In Liberia, we have several rubber plantations, but over the years, it has been evident that a lot of the rubber plantations have kids that instead of rather going to school, they are there tapping rubber for the company along with their parents. And so that tool and that data collected was used to share with different responders, including the Ministry of Labor and then the Ministry of Gender. And at the moment, they are trying to kind of put together a mechanism to be able to address some of those issues. So those are some of the projects we've worked on over the time.
Thank you. I have a question. Do we have the video that you want to? All right, so we'll just show the video of Marietje Schaake, the member of the European Parliament.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marietje Schaake and I'm a member of the European Parliament with the Dutch Democratic Party D66. We're part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. I work on trade, foreign policy and technology-related topics. And I'm very sorry I cannot join you in person today, but I am glad I can share some of my thoughts with you through this recording. One of the key questions we need to urgently address is how we can ensure the rule of law applies in a hyper-connected world. We are currently not certain how to apply existing laws when people go online or when the internet is abused, for example, to attack or to repress. The challenge of jurisdiction and territoriality is exacerbated by a globally reaching internet. In the absence of clear rules that safeguard principles such as fair competition and non-discrimination, big technology companies are filling the regulatory void and are developing de facto norms that may conflict with the rule of law itself. And this does not serve the public interest, as judicial as well as democratic oversight are lacking. We should not accept a lawless society, and we should also not accept that the internet is ruled by the laws of the jungle. Currently, terrorists are using social media to recruit new members or to spread their hateful recruitment messages. Criminals exploit weaknesses in the software we use to steal our data, demand money in exchange for it, and do other malicious activities. States are trying to influence the outcomes of elections by organizing online disinformation campaigns or hacking vital election infrastructure. There is now effectively impunity for those who are responsible for these criminal and malicious activities. While technology can help solve some of these problems, it also creates new rule of law challenges. Let's zoom in on the example of terrorist content or hate speech online. Governments are actively encouraging technology companies or platforms to develop and use new technologies to take down illegal content. And given the amount of content that is uploaded every minute, it is impossible to let people or human beings scrutinize every single piece of that content. So platforms are developing databases with terrorist propaganda and other kinds of illegal content, and then use algorithms to go through these databases and determine what can and cannot be posted online. However, there is no transparency about the content that is included in such databases. There's no information about the functioning or the use of the algorithms that are involved. There's no information about the amount of content that is being taken down. And there is no independent mechanism to prevent legal content from being taken down or from being labeled as illegal. There's no effective mechanism to get redress once content is wrongfully taken down. So it is clear we have a problem here. By trying to solve a rule of law problem, we end up with creating another one. And we now risk to end up in a situation where freedom of expression is not governed by laws, but by terms of service of commercial companies whose expertise is selling advertisements. With many citizens accessing news only via social media platforms and certain search engines being used for nearly 100% of searches, the public interest is at stake. If we use and promote technologies to solve societal problems, we need to be able to understand how they work, what the underlying code is, and what the context is in which they will be used. Otherwise, we risk ending up destroying the rule of law in the name of defending it. Now, I hope your gathering today will shed light on how to create more resilience in defending and promoting the rule of law in a changing and in a hyper-connected world. And I welcome to receive any of your recommendations or insights that you develop in the course of the day. Thank you.
Well, that's a perfect transition to Legal Atlas, because part of what she's concerned about is the trustworthiness of the laws themselves. So, Amir?
Okay, first of all, my name is Amir from Legal Atlas. I just want to say I've heard Carter tell versions of the story 3 days now, and I'm awestruck every single time and really impressed. It's also a very good place for me to go from the incredibly local and the incredibly highbrow. We are somewhere in the middle. I'd intended to start this story with a story about my older sister and then realized we're being filmed, so I'm going to spare you the fact because she would watch that. But I'm going to start quite simply with what we do. If you enter our site, it says understand the law and then use it. And that very simple, powerful explanation is exactly where we stand within the chain of things that need to happen for rule of law to occur. So you can break it down in many ways. I've written down sort of a sketch, but it's first you need access, then you need understanding, then you need capacity to act, and then you need protection once you've acted. Obtaining legislation, while not incredibly easy in every country, exists. We have mapped over 800 databases where you can get legally published laws. It is part of the rule of law, which is already mainstreamed into the world. Making sense of it is a little bit more difficult. And what we do is we take legislation and turn it into a data set. So it's great to know a specific article of law, but that doesn't actually, unless you are a lawyer from that country in that field, you'll not know the context of it. You'll have a sentence which will then be provisoed by a million overarching principles and a few other pieces of legislation that tie into it. We take a topic and we create a data set of the laws that tie into that topic. To give you examples of how this could be, how this is incredibly useful in the world, because we were strongly discouraged from using any sort of presentation material, which is very hard to someone presenting essentially an online visual platform. But to give you physical examples from our work, if you take Israeli legislation on clean air, so the law is physically beautiful. It has every single proviso that you would want. It controls source pollutions, movement pollutions. It has a recurring program of how to recheck both the materials and the levels that are allowed. And it has a capacity for the minister to regulate funding to give to the enforcement officers, which they didn't do for 6 years. It could have been 5.5, I'm not sure, but 5.5 or 6 years. So you have this beautiful piece of legislation which you would have read without actually understanding that there is no meaning to it unless it's tied in with other enforcement pieces of legislation. And what we do is we take the bigger picture of that, and the way we do that is we define a topic, anything from wildlife trade to anti-corruption to money laundering. And we invest a lot of human time into defining what exactly that means. And we scope that, we check it in a few countries, and we develop what is called a framework. These are elements that comprise a topic, an issue, and they make sense within it. And then we create a visualization of how that would look across all countries. And you have a test set against which you can check almost every country. What the platform actually does is then it allows you, it itself is a combination of the human effort I've just described, tagging that comes from it, and an automated system that creates visualizations that will allow you to understand where there's a gap, or in countries, this isn't the UN, and so there are certain countries in which there isn't a gap, instead there are 7 authorities responsible for the same thing, which, knowing human beings, doesn't actually create any enforcement whatsoever. Because you're going to have 7 authorities each saying, actually, that's not my job, because they're supposed to do that. And you'll have 7. The largest example I've encountered is 11 authorities in charge of exactly the same thing, and not a single one of them had funding, so that was fun. Our system allows for us to identify that. Obviously, it's an iterative process throughout almost any topic. I personally am well-versed more in the environmental climate change issues, but we work well beyond that. In order to make use of this, you need to know who your audience is. And for us, the audience is triple, I would say. It's legislators, because shockingly to me as someone with a law degree, not all legislators hold a law degree, and I have to accept that that's fine. And yet they need to write the policy, which is absolutely fair. And I don't expect them to be lawyers, but they need to understand the context within their own country, free of the agency issue of speaking to their own bar association. Second is within the country, NGOs. To tell a little story of my sister, which I really hope she won't watch this far into the video, so she might forgive me, is she has 4 children. And it took me a very long time to persuade her not to buy the most polluting Jeep possible to transport them to every single place. It took me 6 months. A day before she was supposed to buy whatever I had persuaded her to purchase, there was a massive demonstration by Greenpeace, and then very far away, Sea Shepherd had done something. They had demonstrated against 2 organizations and had caused mistakenly injuries during these protests. And if you looked into the laws of what they would have and could have done, they weren't protesting against any law. They had a moral outrage issue. But the companies they were protesting against had not committed any legal mistakes. If they had understood the law better, they could have rallied in front of Parliament and asked to change 3 sub-regulations. That's all that was required. A more focused battle of anyone in civil society. I happen to know environmental issues, but anyone in civil society, that is how our society works. That is how rule of law works. Nobody is perfect. It's an iterative process. So that is the second audience. The third audience, and it's the one in which I entered, is the negotiations, international negotiations. Countries are like people. In order to act well, we need to have our own conscience, which is civil society often, the judicial, anything like that. But we are a shame society, which I discussed with someone here earlier on. We need to know other people's eyes are on us. And in order to understand what's going on in negotiations, how a different country behaves, what I can actually get from them, what actually works within that system, I need to be able to have some comparable discussion. So my example is the climate change negotiations. Somebody once mocked up the numbers of years of education for each of the delegations that had come. And obviously it went with money. So you can have, I think it was the Botswanan delegation had the 2 most brilliant people I'd ever met, but there were 2, as opposed to the American delegation of 81 people. And the numbers of years of education, I think the American delegation had 732 years of education and experience among them dealing with climate change negotiations. Botswana had 43, which is impressive, but still much less. These are our third audience, and in order to provide them with as much information as we can, we try and create the most comprehensive language we can in a combination between our research, the back end, the definition of the topic, the framework, and an internet automation of the terms that we search in order to continuously update. And then human resources always write into us, always tell us, we think this doesn't work. Perhaps you've missed this in Afghanistan. Perhaps, this piece of legislation in Vietnam is no longer viable. I'm going to end, because we were told to be quite brief, and I'm already not brief. I'm going to end with a question that Justice Ginsburg was asked on the first day. She was asked how you can create trust in the most passive of bodies, the judicial body, when none exists. It's easy in the United States. It's easy in the UK. It's a little bit harder where I come from, which is Israel, and it's a little bit harder in other places. And the only way to create that is as many eyes as possible. We're not an advocacy group, but the more people that actually understand, can actually wield law, not just say, I know Article 14 and subsection 12, but that can actually wield the law, the more the rule of law has a chance. Nobody is perfect. You need people questioning you, arguing with you the whole time. So that is what we do. I hope it made sense. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So that's great. The company that Amir works for was awarded an innovation award by the Hague Institute for Internationalisation of Law
2012.
In 2012, and I was there when that happened. It was one of the many technologies that were presented in the innovative justice space, and probably the most exciting job that I don't have that I'd love to have is Wilfried's job, where he gets to search this technology out and the companies that are doing it, and looking forward to hearing what the current state of play is.
Thank you. It's a pleasure seeing anyone so jealous about my job. Thank you. Yes, I love my job too. Maybe I would like to start with a question. Who here in the audience is able to build a mobile app or a big data application or has an engineering background? Who here is able to pull that off? I see 2, 3, 4 hands. And this is the reality we're working with. We're here at the World Justice Forum. I don't see anyone from Google, Microsoft, or Facebook. And many people talk about IT, but there's very few people within the justice sector, ministries, civil society, that can build solutions themselves. And that's one of the big challenges. So the pleasure of my job is we look around the world trying to find the interesting justice innovations. And a big component of that is trying to find the teams that are complementary, where there is a lawyer, there is an IT person, there is a designer, and it's credible that they can pull it off and they know how to build and test things. So we've had, what we have been doing, just a little bit more context on that, we've been looking for more than 6 years for the best justice innovations around the world. We've selected 400, you can find them all on innovatingjustice.com. This year alone, we just got a new batch of candidates, 600 innovations applied for our Innovating Justice Challenge. We are guiding and incubating 20 entrepreneurs this year, mainly from emerging countries where we see that we can make a big difference with what we do, like Ukraine, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, because that's where you have the startups. If you invest $10,000 or $20,000 in them, they can make a big difference and change pivotal societies and also make a big thing. So what we also see is differences in ecosystems. We see blockchain very present in Ukraine. We see Kenya has mobile payments, so you can have interesting things with mobile micropayments, legal advice via mobile phones and quick micropayments. We see in the UAE the leadership being very vocal about pushing innovation, so that's also very interesting. So there's advantages in different ecosystems, and one of the frustrations that led me to step into this position was my work in my previous life was working with governments and the European Commission and United Nations on website projects for migration or criminal record exchange or big, large-scale national or international developments. And they were incredibly costly and often done within every country. So there were websites being built for $5 million, $10 million. Whereas I could see startups doing the same thing for $50,000. So the difference between what was wasted by the taxpayers and what you could see startups doing was painful. So we've been working mostly with startup teams because we feel that's where the energy is and where we can also reach scale. I think one of the features of lawyers is also that they sometimes don't understand their skills as an engineer or as a builder. So, because you are trained to build arguments, to build laws, and these are interesting things that we see showing up in chatbots, for example, that are now more and more integrated. So these are the kind of technologies you are more familiar with and where you can also play a leading role. And I would invite all of you to, for example, look at that technology and start playing around with it. I think one of the features of lawyers or people in ministries is also often a certain conservatism or so who here, I'll ask another question that I just think is relevant. Who here has the natural inclination to always buy and use the latest product just because it's new? Who here is a first mover and always wants the latest, newest, hippest? We have a few of you. I would say, please, I would invite more of you to take that role sometimes. In justice, if you see a latest new justice app or legal technology or anything, and you are using it because you're a first mover and you just love it because it's new, the justice innovators need more of you and need you to be vocal about what works and what doesn't work. Because there is one of the small frustrations of my work is also seeing there is so much innovation happening, but there's a lot of innovators also struggling to reach scale. We see law societies suing innovators because they say it infringes on monopolies. It's not always true. They often lose in court, but still there's a lot of resistance from ministries also sometimes. So we need vocal people who can defend justice innovators and use it. And yeah, My organization wants to do our best also to help to find the first users, because first users can help a justice innovator to reach scale. I can give much more examples of interesting innovations, etc., but I think these are some of the points I wanted to make for now, and I mean, interested in discussing more later.
Well, we've heard a lot of different examples from the government, from the software company that builds a tool for law, and from a company that is finding lots of innovators outside the justice sector and bringing them into the justice sector. Now we have the deputy minister who works within the framework of the government that is thinking about innovation. Abdulla, we look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you very much. I really would like to thank the World Justice Forum for inviting me to speak about the experience that we have ran out over Ministry of Justice. I know it's afternoon, so I just would like to take off with you and look at a 35,000 feet view on terms what's happened within Ministry of Justice for the last almost 10 years. And if you allow me, I would like to cover it from the strategical point of view and what is the guideline that the federal government put for different federal entities in terms how we can drive this forward. In 2006, the federal government announced the strategical planning for the government. And from that point, everything has been aligned with the different ministries. And when you have a strategy for the government, and one of the 6 elements of those strategies are the fair justice and safe public, where we align the Ministry of Justice strategy. And after that, when we start doing that for a couple of years, another initiatives, which I would say that is the second wave that the government start to push for, is to be more service-oriented, to focus on the services, and try to provide the better services for the citizen. The third wave, when it start focusing more in terms of smart government and try to implement applications and smart applications, especially on mobile phones, to deliver those services to the public. The fourth wave, we start speaking innovation. The fifth wave, we start speaking happiness. So the vision of the government, it's not about trying to implement services and smart application without a purpose. So if we look at the final purpose of the government, is how we can make people happy, how we can provide the better services to make people happy. Of course, this is a challenge, and it's a big challenge for Ministry of Justice, since 50% of our clients are not happy. So, because, and the other 50%, maybe another 50% of them, they are not happy. So you end up with almost 25% of happy people who really would like to go. But it's all about a mindset. When the government start drawing the strategy and trying to push all the governments in terms how to bring happiness to people. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, he stand on the government summit and he raised his phone up and he says, I would like to have all the application, all the services for the government to be on mobile phones. And from that moment, we started in Ministry of Justice in thinking how we can bring smart applications to public. We start thinking of we are not here really to develop smart application only. We are also would like to measure, because things that you cannot measure, you cannot manage. And smart application, it really helps us big time in terms of measuring what's happening within the justice arena. So we started building the case management system. The first version of it has been released in 2008. We are in the process now of releasing the case management system version 4. And the case management system, it's all about trying to document and trying to indicate each individual element and activities happening with the judges, happening with the lawyers, happening with the party, with the expert, not in format that can be captured by images. So we are starting digitalizing that by word. So we have that can be searchable. And at the second part, we start to gather all the information, laws and regulation, and put it in one single portal. And this portal, it has an innovation way of searching. So you can search by the keyword, you can search by different topics. That is, I would say it's similar to the search engine that Google and Yahoo and different searching engine that they have. So normal people, they can search for laws and regulation without any hassles. So they don't need to go to the which law is really specified in terms of bankruptcy. They don't need to know that. What they need to write the word bankruptcy, and all the laws and decision which is related to this topic is gonna pop up. Big data is something that we are also focusing on big time. But before that, we just thought that if we can start capturing everything and put it as an information and big data, and we have huge information, let's think about the open data itself. It's the reason that we are gathering the information. It's not because that the government or Ministry of Justice would like to develop the state-of-the-art technology. Why not we can push it to the public? Why we can push it to the companies? So the private sector can really share those information, and they can play around it, and they can bring different solutions. And this is really what we have done with the laws and regulation when we start pushing it to the portal as an open data with open sources. We have two companies who's working with us very closely, LexisNexis and Cider Legal Publishing. They have taken the information, they have changed it in an innovation way without investing too much as Ministry of Justice within those organizations. Of course, as an open data which is available to the public, we have implemented that to certain services that we are providing to public. So people who's coming for notary public, they can notice through our website if they would like to do a service, they can take a ticket. The queue system is fully automated, so they can take the ticket online, they can see it on their mobiles, and they can even decide, since the information and the application is telling them that we have 3 locations. Location 1, it has 20 people waiting. Location 2, it has 10 people waiting. Location 3, it has 3 people waiting. So make up your mind which location you would like. And we are indicating through the GPS and the information, telling them that how far is each individual location of us. So they can decide going to location 2 based on the distance that they have. And this is something that we pushed to the public in terms taking the open data and the big data in terms how they can push it. Of course, at the end of the day, we would like people to be happy. And when we start doing that, we start appointing the Chief Happiness Officer in Ministry of Justice, and he worked very closely with the Chief Innovation Officer in terms how those two positions working very closely to develop the services in Ministry of Justice to provide happiness to people. We came out of the story of how we can make it much easier for people to access justice. We are not trying to do it anymore. What we are trying to do is how we can bring justice to people, how we can make it moving all our services between the hand of people. It's sometimes you can consider it a bit difficult in terms of how far we can through information to public, how we can release information so it can be good, people can use it in a good manner or they can use it in a bad manner. But if we keep thinking like that, we will hold the information and we kept it for ourselves. And we will say, no, it's very difficult to release those data. So thanks God that we have came out of this way of thinking, and we said that we need to release the data. First of all, it's the private sector will help really in terms of developing those information, and most importantly, this is the guideline of the government that they really would like you to push the information to the public. Some example that I would like to mention in terms of the application that we are developing, video conferencing, online dispute resolution, the ODR, which allowing people really to interact with judges without being present in the courtroom. Of course, there is certain condition which is applied over here. Looking at how we handle the laws and regulations. So we have an application, a platform that if we would like to develop any new law, we look at all the laws across the region with the help of different agencies that we are working on. They grab the information for us, and we start looking and comparing the laws with other countries so we can build the future law in United Arab Emirates. Business process reengineering is something that we are working very hard on in terms of how we can business process re-engineer the judiciary procedure itself and make it much easier in terms of time, in terms of cost, and in terms of quality. We are working very closely with Hell Innovation in terms of providing surveys to the public to came up with different findings that we can think about and put it in innovation sessions, and came up with a different way of providing our services in an innovation way. Another thing that we are keen to work with Hell Innovation also is establishing the Judiciary Innovation Center, which is going to tackle all the innovation issues in the future, put it under one umbrella and see how we can move from inside the box to the outside the box and think how we can kill the dinosaur and move forward. The Justice Innovation Center will work with fear. And if you don't have this fear of the changes which is going to come to your organization, either you will kill yourself or somebody else will kill you. And the scenario over here is really very obvious if you look at different stories of Nokia, Kodak, and look what Uber are doing. So we are trying to bring all those type of thinking to the new Justice Innovation Center. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. So think of your questions. I'll ask a few questions up here of our panelists, and then we'll be coming to you. Take a couple notes and write some questions. Carter, my first question is for you. And in a transparent environment where you're making a lot of information available about people's need to interact with the Justice Center and the government and the police and so forth, what is the reaction of the government to the work that you're doing? And how do you get buy-in?
Yeah, so those projects are kind of more like government related, like the Freedom of Information Request platform. The government committed themselves to it. They passed the law since 2010. And so when we presented this innovative way of information exchange, it was something that they highly embraced. But then after the development, we now needed to work with the public information officers. And there were the main problems still exist. The public information officers are just individuals that they appoint from the different ministries. And those individuals don't have the kind of power. There is such a huge bureaucracy, and so they don't have the authority when information is being requested for them to just go to a department and collect that information and release the information. So that barrier is there, and of course, the government, every time we kind of meet them, especially with the Open Government Partnership Initiative, they keep kind of providing commitments that we're going to kind of do more in this regard. So with that aspect, especially to Liberia, is a huge challenge. But across the border with the Anti-Corruption Commission platform, the government from the President's office, there's a real huge support for that. And so that's the difference. So for Sierra Leone, the government is really supportive of that. And so they have kind of given all of the required resources, kind of creating awareness, bringing in different stakeholders to ensure that that works.
So you do have to spend some significant time interacting with the government to make sure that there's buy-in.
Sure.
Okay. Another aspect that we talked about collectively on the panel, Amir, is the awareness of laws and the importance of the awareness of laws. There must be some prioritization process in your company to decide what you're going to work on first. Could you explain a little bit about that?
The hardest part of what we do is the initial definition. What is actually included, as you rightly asked, what's actually included within access to information, wildlife trade, environmental crime, and so on. These aren't obvious, they often overlap. Where does taxation enter into renewable energy, for example? What is included in water management? Is it every land use possible, and so on? So yes, that is a vital part. It is the initial part. By checking what actually has an effect on the ground, I think is the usual yardstick that you do. If I am looking to change or do something within a specific field, I will have to ask, okay, if I transgress against the law, if I would like to follow the procedures, what is every single piece of legislation that's tied in? But then you have to be quite harsh as well. You have to say, okay, this is not directly of the first order related. So we did fisheries. IUU fisheries is the hardest subject I believe we'll ever do, because IUU stands for illegal, unreported, and unregulated. So essentially we're trying to write down what the regulations are for stopping unregulated fisheries, which is really hard to define, because if it's unregulated, then it's not illegal. So unregulated is just the identification of gaps. We cannot include within that many general articles of criminal law that say anyone not obeying the general obeisance to, and these exist. So yes, it's quite hard. It is the initial part. It is an iterative process. Frameworks change like human beings do. So if you deal with climate change, for example, in South Africa, I've discovered you have to deal with unions and labor unions. that is one of the most important negotiators within the climate change issue within South Africa. And we didn't know that before we spoke to their delegates. So it's definitely an iterative process. We are a legal intelligence platform, and I think intelligence implies capacity to be slightly dynamic. So I hope that answered some of the question.
One of the areas that has attracted billions of dollars of investment in the last couple of years is the legal technology field. But that was certainly not the case going back 10, 15, 20 years. Legal innovation has been quite slow to take root. In fact, the major areas of automation that did take place outside of document assembly were principally in the legal research field and in the e-discovery field. And the e-discovery field was driven by large billable hour cases with millions of documents and handfuls of people working on them, but they innovated and did some quite interesting work. Now I see the legal aid field beginning to do a lot of innovation, but Wilfried, you see a lot of you see people that are getting into this business because they think there's some money to be made. What are the characteristics of people that you see that are moving into justice, innovation, and technology?
I think maybe one of the realities is still that some of these billions went into legal tech that was mainly meant to make some lawyers richer. So it doesn't always help access to justice. So there's parts of legal tech that just serve to increase the margins of lawyers, but don't benefit citizens. I think, the characteristic that we see of entrepreneurs is people who want to make a difference, who feel responsible for making a difference. Sometimes they have IT or development skills they see no one else has, so they see a market opportunity. There is very successful cases like LegalZoom that's worth more than $500 million now in the US, started 10 years ago, but now you have very large countries like Nigeria or Malaysia, or where you have new ventures like DIY Law that are the new LegalZooms in the making. So it's clear that the potential they have is very clear, and you have now some examples in the US that are shining examples to entrepreneurs around the world where they see. So some of them are fascinated by new technologies. I think blockchain is a big one. Blockchain is about truth, evidence, stamping it. You have these chatbots. Some people are fascinated by bringing virtual reality into justice. So we see interesting things there too. So some of them are passionate about a cause, some about a technology, and some just feel responsible because there is no access to justice in their country, and they're more Gandhi types who also happen to understand a bit of business or technology.
I'm going to have one question for Abdulla, but the panelists, if you have questions for each other, I'll come to you right after that, and then we'll go to the audience. One of the areas that first arose in the field of technology, I guess I'll stand up so I can see the people over here, was the field of digital signatures back in the mid-90s. And legislators from a couple of jurisdictions, actually it started in the industry, it started with a company called VeriSign that wrote a whole bunch of material, and it was in the field of electronic data interchange. There was a whole supply chain set of issues in large companies. So they drove the need for having some form of verification, authenticated signature that would cross borders and cross contracts and be acceptable. And then all of a sudden that gave rise to the notion that, well, you can have a digital signature on a document, and that is going to be something that will be the same thing as a written signature. States got into that right away and said, not a chance. Written signature is what counts, not any form of electronic signature. And it took states and the federal government years to get to the point of coming up with various types of conflicting digital signature laws. The net result is, once again, industry drives the change. So when I moved from one country to another, from Massachusetts to Texas, I was buying a house in the other country, and sure enough, the real estate industry allowed me and my wife to sign all of our papers electronically. until we got the broker who took over the file and said, I don't know anything about this. And let me tell you, it was very upsetting when I had a small change to the agreement and I literally had to go print out the document, find a fax machine, and send off the one change, when all we were doing up until that point was just going and press send. It was, you get used to the convenience real fast, and then you want it. When you have a government like yours that's driving the change from the top down I think there are some lessons to be learned that could be shared with other countries and so forth. What lessons do you think could be learned if we had the government involved in partnership with all of us, and would you be willing to share them?
I would believe that the interference with the whole government, and if, for example, look at this Singaporean government. If I'm in Ministry of Finance, I'm not working alone here in Ministry of Finance, and I'm not working alone in Ministry of Law. So there is a backbone that the government drew for everybody. That's why I refer back to the government strategy. And the government, when it's draw this strategy, it's drawing it to enforce everybody working together. The aim of having big data, smart application, is for the benefit of the people. So if it is not for the benefit of the people, why should I invest millions and millions of dirhams in terms of developing an application? And when I log into this application, it's telling me you need to log onto the different entity to complete your work. So the same hassle that I have throughout the government while I was to work from different customer service, I'm experiencing the same thing with the digital application. So the government, when it's worked together, and especially when it came from up to down, from top to bottom, where you have a vision of the country, you have the strategy for the government, you have the innovation strategy for the government, you have the happiness formula, all aligned to the government, and it's all connected to each other. I think this is one major things that bring everybody working together. That's why you will not find different entities reinvest in synergic services or shared services. So if the country would like, as a government would like to have an HR system, so I'll invest in one HR system. If I would like to have a payroll system, I'll invest in one single payroll system. If I do need a data center, so I'll have a centralized data center where I can host everything. We across this experience, when we started in Dubai government, each individual entity, they have started to build their own and invest on the hardware, the data center, and everything. But later on, we have came over this challenge and start thinking how's the guideline came from the government.
Yeah, thank you. So, do any of the panelists have questions for each other before I go to the audience?
I think what I find an interesting question is maybe what are the barriers that we all feel? Why is there not more of you everywhere, of legal atlases? Why is there already not more innovation in UAE? Like, what are the barriers that are holding us back? I find that still an interesting question.
Yeah, from my country, with a couple of years back, left from a 14-year civil crisis, and then trying to rebuild, we fell into the Ebola virus disease. And so there are a lot of competing priorities for the government to get the country stable. And so just kind of getting deeply involved with these different types of innovation we are talking about, whereas just 20% of the population has electricity, there is no running water in the country, the economy is totally bad. At some point in time, they strive to kind of align themselves with some of these global initiatives by signing up to them. But the implementation of those initiatives becomes a burden for them because they don't have the finance to kind of support the implementation. And so, yeah, that's one of the major part of our experience.
First of all, it's very hard to mention obstacles after you've heard Ebola and civil war, so those aren't the obstacles that we have, so it's hard to compete with that. But I think we're facing a qualitative change, like the battle to change the Bible from Latin to vernacular languages. We're changing a minimum of what people require now. And expressing to governments, to big, slow-moving institutions, be they regional, local, or even municipalities, expressing to them the need for that change and the need for the investment into that change is complex. It's very hard to say to someone, no, I understand that all of these laws are available, but nobody can use them unless they've specialized in these laws because that is not the language that they speak. And then trying to do that across the board in 196 countries. That in itself is a challenge because it is a ground-shaking change in how we understand the minimum that is required to create justice.
Yani if I would like to add something, in United Arab Emirates there is 200 plus nationalities, and of course language is one of the major concerns that we have and one of the challenges that if I would like access to justice equal to everybody, then I really would like to have our applications, accessibilities available in Arabic, English, and almost there is 200 nationalities. That's mean maybe 200 language or something like that, but which is really a huge challenge for us in terms of how we can take this forward. The changes in legislation that may be needed in order to combine digital procedures with time to appeal, if we really would like to implement ODR, for example. This is some of the things that we are thinking and we are trying to resolve it internally. The enforcement of judgment still in a gray zone in terms of ODR and video conferencing. We must think of extending those type of procedure to another execution area. The mandatory various optional. If we would like, if we move to digital world, should we make it compulsory? Should we make it optional? What about people, older people, how they can access the system? Of course, technology changing very fast, and whenever you invest in a certain technology, you're surprised with the next generation technology coming to you. That's why I'm telling my team in terms of technology, I always tell them, don't let IT people lead you, because they are thinking technology and purely technology. Whenever new technology is coming, they would like to buy it. So we need to think in terms of solution, but not technology.
So now questions from the audience, okay? 1, 2, 3, and then I'll move to that side. First.
Thank you very much. I found that extremely interesting. I want to just follow on the last question that was posed from the panel. I believe there are three, and just to push the argument towards the relationship between big data and rule of law, because it probably also got hidden somewhere in the discussion. Localization, which relates to language, is the very first real challenge if you deal with language and also local big data information, because we need that, and that does not really lend itself to modalities of work that achieves a level of data that is meaningful to users. The second challenge would be democratization, because also big data is only relevant to specialists. The ability of laymen to deal with big data or layman to deal even with big data of legislation or court decisions is also limited, and therefore we need to worry about the artificial intelligence side of it that would make big data relevant to me in terms of access to justice, in terms of rule of law, in terms of ability to figure out information that will empower me, the citizen with a small c. Probably the biggest one of all is regulation. The tendency to allow big data to jump into the space, we've seen reluctance to it with all the security, with all the tendency of governments to regulate this big data into the space, including within the rule of law system. It's not easy, and therefore open data policy or big data policy remains to be nascent.
So what I'm going to do is get all the questions asked because we're getting close to the end. So ask, and then we'll take the answers. So the second questioner, please.
I was struck by the comment of the EU Parliament member when she said that we have to be careful about the role of commercial entities in basically enforcing the rule of law through their terms of service. So my question is, we talk about the access to law and transparency and making apps and technology a useful tool to provide access to the laws for folks. But when it comes to enforcement, how do we deal with the commercial entities with differing objectives and roles in enforcing their terms of service as people interact and behave sometimes badly within that sphere?
Thanks. I've got two questions, if I may, but my first is very much picking up on what the previous question is really all about. I'm sure the speakers will be familiar that there's now an increasing push towards open data, open access, information, and so forth. But all of that information, the metadata, or whatever you call it, does not necessarily lead to accountability, right? So I guess I really wanted to get the panel's views on whether you think that's a challenge in a sense, pushing a lot of information out there, having so many accelerators, so many projects and so forth, and how in a sense you reconcile that tension that there seems to be between, on the one hand, the projects and the ideas, but on the other, how effective those projects can be in terms of how the data gets used, how the information gets digested and so forth. And if I may, my second question is really more on the practical side. To all the panelists, in a sense, if you were to give 1, 2, maybe 3 sort of suggestions or advice to a wannabe innovator, put it that way, what would it be? So somebody who's really wanted to create an idea and whatnot, drawing on your experience in your own fields, what would you recommend they do?
Question, just one more question over here. Then we'll get the panelists to pick up on what you want to.
Thank you so much. I don't know whether many of you know about Malawi, but Malawi is ranked the poorest country in the world. But that does not make us lack ambition. Actually, we have. Last year, we introduced a case management system, and I want to trust Microsoft on its word when it said that ours was the best on the planet. But that is not to blow so much about ourselves, but rather to ask a question to any one of you, because the assumption about digitalization seems to be that maybe all countries in the world are on the same wavelength, which is not the case, because for a country like mine, the challenge is quite different. How are you going to promote IT awareness to a population which literally is probably 5-10% literate, and that maybe 1% IT illiterate? What can I take home from here?
Okay. I'm going to let the panelists start. We'll start on this end. Abdulla, do you want to pick up any part of the questions, and I'll try to keep track of what we're answering and what.
The technology which is the best case management system do I have? Should I go technology? Should I go solution? And again, I will tell you, don't let IT people lead you. And don't be technology driven. You can be more like business driven in terms, what's really my need? A lot of technologies company would like to provide you state-of-the-art case management system. But is that really what you need? In terms of identifying what's really you would like to need, and then you measure it in terms of the budget that I have, and I would invest on this, and how far of those features I can implement within a strategy of 3 to 5 years. And then you can decide in terms, what is the best solution I can implement in terms of case management system. Ministry of Justice have run through this experience, and we are in generation 3 implementation of case management system. And one of the things that we consider at that stage, that we said that we have enough budget, we can go this Formula 1 car to buy it, but unfortunately the Formula 1, it doesn't have a track to move. So it was really stopped at that stage. So we rethink about the whole thing again, and we said how we can start training. So we have implement a training session in our judges and administrative courts employees, and later on we start incrementally increase the level of maturity of case management system based on that. The other topic which has been mentioned about terms and regulations, I do believe that there are certain countries who's looking in terms of how we can review these terms and regulation. And I know that there are certain countries that I don't like to mention, that they have a certain understanding with those multinational companies in terms how we can review the terms and conditions with you to bring the best to your countries. So a quick example in terms of WhatsApp. Everybody's using WhatsApp, and if you go through the terms and conditions, if you are living in the United States or in Canada, you are giving away your right to go back if you have any conflict to the court. So you have another way of solving the issues between yourself as an end user and WhatsApp within outside the courts. And this is one of the things that really concern. Again, one major thing, it's the maturity level and how really I do understand as an end user and how can I use the technology. It's the big questions. I believe that if I ask all of you to open their sitting in the phones, they will see that they have given a full access on their album and their contact, on their location. So there is certain mobiles that you can protect your information by not sharing the location. Why do I need to share the most popular location I'm in? Just you can switch off that feature. Why do I need to share my photos album with different application? I can switch that. So how far I do understand and I really do understand how to function my phone and function my technology, it can really protect myself. But again, I do agree that there is a certain point where can Ministry of Justice or legislation committees look at those terms and conditions and review it and make it align with the government and with the country laws and regulations.
Okay, Wilfried?
Just to pick, I think for Malawi, Connor Satterley is right behind you. He's a member of our team who was in Malawi just a month and a half ago. There's many innovations that use SMS or other types of services that also reach rural Africa, so maybe you can connect and see what could be relevant. I think competition authorities from Europe try to deal with that sometimes, try to take assertive roles, but your question is very difficult. I think like allowing some form of competition, whether it's in the private sector or even in the public sector, is important. So choice for citizens helps. Also, if there is a monopoly of ministries of justice, it can be a problem. It can lead to a good balance between private initiatives and public monopolies, I think, is what we stand for at Hill. Your question, also interested, I think open data, linking open data with accountability is not so easy. I think the future of justice is also considering that justice is not only about accountability for people behaving badly, but also for recognizing people who behave in a positive way for society. And I think there is a huge opportunity in that area for making justice more entertaining, more rewarding, more positive for the people who actually comply to the laws or who are contributing in a positive way. And then you don't need to be so scared of open data if it is used for that too. Maybe it's a bit idealistic, but I think there is a lot of opportunities there.
Amir?
I'm impressed with everyone that didn't need to write this down, because for me digitization means I don't remember anything past 3 seconds. So I'm going to go try and, by what I answered with Malawi, I have no governance experience. I obviously don't control the government. What I have seen in many countries that I've worked in is that the investment in education from the very lowest level. The problem with many governments is that our lifespan is shorter than the lifespan of a state. So the only advice I can give, this has nothing to do with Legal Atlas, is the very slow and steady building up of regulation within education specifically. But I say that very privately. The problem of localization. The problem of localization is actually, this is a solution. The democratic nature of what many of these apps or platforms are trying to do is to make them more accessible. And in order to be successful, I hope that means that they will have to be manipulated or open to manipulation by local bodies, sort of open to public sourcing. And in that sense, I actually see an advantage here. Same goes for democratization of big data. Big data exists. Statistics and the use of statistics has been around since 1911, long before computers. We use it in order to plan our policies far in advance. This is not at all a new thing. What is actually happening now is that we are putting a face to it in a language that you don't need to have a master's in advanced mathematics to understand what everything means, because it appears, if you look, for example, at Carter's projects, the visualization of it is gorgeous. Obviously, I think the same of our site, but I'll speak about the sites as well. There are many. So I actually believe that that is what's happening. Regulation of data dumps. I think this is going to have to be, I mean, Wilfried said this is going to have to be something that is solidified into a conflict, and it's a political decision. It's not a regulatory one. People have to decide, we would like to track terrorists and pedophiles, but we don't want people to see my WhatsApp. But at the same time, we would like to see the bank accounts that came out in Panama, but we don't want my private. We have to, as a society, come together behind some sort of political decision. That is an ethical, political, philosophical decision, not one of regulation or technology, in my mind. Careful with industry writing the rules. Socialist, everything, and I'm very much not a conservative right wing, but industry has always written the rules. And that is the nature of society. This is not a good or a bad thing. I think in this sense, the democratization of what's going on, it just makes it much more visible. It's not a bad thing because people who run industry are part of society as we are. All we are trying to do, I feel what Hill is trying to do, what this forum is trying to do, is give people the capacity to speak to industry on a par level. How do you regulate big commercial bodies? That is, in every single COP, that is becoming a larger and larger dual essence bodies, which in law is a thing, whether that applies to software companies or not, is going, I believe is going to be the next thing. But again, I believe that the more people that know about this, the more people that are versant, that are literate in the capacity to say, actually, these 7 laws apply to you. The more eyes you have on them, the more that becomes a realistic thing. Open source doesn't make you accountable. Open information, metadata doesn't make you accountable. If it's true, if it's verified, if it's overseen, if it's monitored, I think to a certain extent it does, because we are human beings, and as I've said before to someone else who's sitting here, we do work very well with shame. If it becomes a focused concept, if you understand what's going on there, its very existence outside the capacity to look at it leads to accountability. Not directly like we'd want, it's not a criminal fine or an imprisonment, but it does lead to those things. The only tip I can give an entrepreneur in that sense is visualize what you want at the end. I love philosophy. My first degree was intellectual history, intellectual medieval history. That's wonderful. But you need to have a visualization of what the user interface looks like, of what exactly are going to be the parameters. That'll change, but be as pragmatic as you can. The philosophy is important, but you're going to be forced to deal with it at some stage. Have a vision exactly of what it looks like, down to the color of, in our case, it's maps, the sea, which is turquoise, weirdly, for us, but that's a different discussion. I think I've answered everything I could.
Okay, Carter, final word for you.
Yeah, so with Malawi, Malawi and Liberia, we have kind of shared the same context. So maybe I will share with you how we are to where we are. The educational system is also a major issue. So we started small. We got some basic funding to monitor the Liberian 2011 elections using SMS. So we're like 4 persons that started this tech hub. And because back then there was no access to kind of fiber connection, we had a satellite dish connection of 2 meg. And as a way to kind of expand our impact, we've created what we call the co-working hours. And with the co-working hours, we align doctors, teachers, lawyers, who otherwise couldn't have access to internet, to come into the space, students alike, to do their research just from the space. We also started basic curriculum, bringing in youths that are interested in technology, and started kind of offering basic trainings around that. And what that does is that it allows those people who got just at least some insight, they could go out there to public schools, they could go out there to NGOs, and be able to help them to start doing basic IT stuff. So we're teaching things basically around website development and other things. Because we thought that with website, it allows your project to go out there, it allows your voice, it allows you to have a global presence, and whatever you're doing, people can be able to get it from the outside. So moving on, we started to get the level of recognition, working on different basic projects, and so we had to go across the border and all of that to work. At the moment, we've now opened a kind of much little bigger space called the Art Campus, and it's actually intended to serve as a collaborative co-working space that will focus on accountability, open governance, as well as social enterprise. And we're hoping that as we kind of develop the place, a lot of different partners, local startups, local NGOs now start to come in. And so basically most of what we do, we use low tech. We are not big countries like sitting on the panel here. These guys are talking global while I'm talking local and he's talking about low tech. So maybe it's something we can start discussion around and see how you can start to apply the basic low tech in your environment to solve some of the problems, and gradually we can get to that level.
Well, as we come to a close, let me just mention one final thing. I earlier told you that in the United States we have started a project called the Justice Hub, and if any of you want a link to the Justice Hub, just bring your card up to me afterwards. This is going to be a virtual space where anybody can post a project that they would like to see worked on. Anybody can participate and actually be a player in the project itself. It's going to be, it's actually just gone live, so this is the earliest moment that we have. You've been a wonderful audience. Please join me in thanking our great panel.